Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming, and I think some more people will come, who knows, but they'll trickle in, don't be distracted, it'll be fine. My name is Caitlin, I'm one of the faculty leaders for EPS, which is EU Postgraduate Staff. That's not a sign, it's a chalkboard. I'm from the humanities. I study English literature and I'm doing my PhD at the moment. Just before we start, I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, excuse me, on whose unceded lands we're holding this panel today. Yes, so we're holding this panel because it is National Science Week. And before we're thinking about this panel, I had no idea what National Science Week was. So I researched. And I found out that National Science Week is Australia's annual celebration of science and technology, and thousands of individuals, from students to scientists to chefs and musicians, who all get involved and take part in science events across the nation. So this is one of those events. Today's symposium features a panel of brilliant academics in the field of science who each call Jesus Lord. So before we begin, will you pray with me? Father God, thank you for this time to meet together. We thank you, God, for your infinite wisdom, the unfathomable depth of your knowledge and your boundless creativity. You created things into being that had never existed before. Your knowledge knows no end. We pray for the men and women of science who are also men and women of faith. Please bless this time together and help us to see more clearly your goodness and greatness. Amen. So today we've got Ali, we've got Peter, we've got Abe, and we've got Laura. So to begin, start with Laura. Please introduce yourself, your area of research, and please share with us what excites you most in your research. Like, what do you nerd out on in your research?
So yes, I'm Laura. I'm doing a PhD and I'm about halfway through. My PhD is in the area of ecology and animal behaviour, and basically I'm trying to think about how we can better manage introduced and invasive species like rats and mice, which sort of overrunning lots of ecosystems around the world and causing lots of problems. So what do I nerd out over? Probably, so basically a lot of my research is getting to go out into the bush and putting cameras out in the bush and seeing what all the animals are up to, because, you know, the average person probably wouldn't get to see much of that because a lot of animals in Australia only come out at night. So I just think it's really cool to get to see animals doing cool things, and it's always really fun when you see a really cool animal, or a lab mate has a really cool photo or video, or you get to catch a really cool animal. That's what I find exciting.
Cool. So I'm Abe, and I'm postdocing at the University of Wollongong. But I have a connection with Sydney. I did my undergrad here. So I do maths. I do pure maths in an area called functional analysis, which really means nothing to most people. So I guess that's connected to the question of what I nerd out over. I very rarely nerd out with many people because it's normally completely arcane. And when you say you do math, they just say, "Oh, you must be so smart," and then you just say, and that's kind of it. But what I do enjoy doing math. I do enjoy doing maths, and one thing I enjoy about it is proving things. Like when you get a key, when you find the key to proving something, and seeing that it's true beyond doubt, and very certain. Like finding that key is really fun, and it's very, very satisfactory. Although it doesn't happen very often.
Hi, I'm Peter. I'm a professor of quantum chemistry, which means I use the equations of quantum mechanics, maths as well, to predict chemistry rather than going into a lab and actually doing experiments. We can predict things in a computer. And that's actually what freaks me out or nerds me out, or whatever the question was, that chemistry is predictable by calculation. That still freaks me out after 30 years, that we can predict things without actually having to go into the lab and do them. It's a sign of a very well-ordered universe.
Hi everyone, I'm Ali and I am doing a PhD in chemistry. And the topic is all to do with futuristic solar panels, which is what I normally tell people, but since you're all scientists, you want to know more, what does that mean? So I'm studying organic photovoltaics, which is carbon-based photovoltaics. And I make them in the lab, so I fabricate them and then I study them and analyze them using spectroscopy. So it's all to do with the chemicals that are absorbing the light and what they're doing and why they're doing that and how we can make it better. And that pretty much is what I nerd out over, the idea that chemicals or materials are colorful. Like, why are things so colorful? It's amazing. You look around and there's red chairs and blue carpet, and that's always fascinated me. So I love getting to play with like colored chemicals and then thinking about that. And as my education has gone on and on and on, it gets deeper and deeper into, now it's not just colors, it's like, well, what are the electrons doing? And if you just think about how a molecule has electrons and they're going like boom, 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 all the time, and then you give it a photon of light and then suddenly they're going bam, 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 differently, and then it's a different color. That's amazing. That's what I know that.
Thank you.
We just shift the camera a little bit because we can't see Ali so much.
Ali,
Sorry, cool. I might ask this first question to Peter, but also feel free to add on. How has being a Christian influenced what you have chosen to research?
So for me, as I intimated before, that the extreme order that I find in the universe is something that I expect as a Christian, because the universe was created by a rational, hyper-intelligent being. And my area of research is something that feeds off that order, that rationality. I'm trying to unpick a fabric that I know has been woven together extraordinarily skillfully and consistently and predictably. And so my research and my Christian faith are actually entirely coherent, go hand in hand.
Does that resonate with anyone else?
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah, I think that when I was choosing what to research, I was curious, and understanding that curiosity was all because I wanted to understand the world that God had made and how we can then use that for the benefit of humanity. So I kind of landed myself in this field of organic photovoltaics, being solar panels. It's very easy to explain to people, what you're doing and why it's important. And I think all research is important, but perhaps at different timescales. And so I get really excited that I can kind of line up my curiosity with being like a useful thing for God's creation and to steward the creation that He's given us in that way.
Yeah, I chose maths because I didn't like labs. I did like, I guess, pursuing truth, but yeah, I think first year chem labs turned me off chemistry, and then second year physics labs turned me off physics. That's how I was left with maths, but yeah, it's all right.
I was probably the same, and that's why I do something with fieldwork now. Not many labs for me.
That actually leads really well, what you just said, into my second question. How does the pursuit of truth shape how you research? Yeah, do you ever think about morality and ethics when you're pursuing truth and problem solving in that?
I think with ethics, like with maths, I think the questions of ethics ends up less being what you research and more how you research and how you deal with people. So I guess this might be connected with some future questions, but I think like one thing that being a Christian really changes how you do research. I think it makes you less, I think, competitive, not in a bad way. I think some competition is good, but I think because for many people in academia, science in particular, perhaps, I don't know, but academia in general, everything is very competitive, right? You're competing for the top grades in undergrad, you're competing for scholarships and PhD positions, you're competing for postdocs, and you're competing for grants, and it is very competitive. So I think it really changes your attitude towards these things and how you see fellow competitors. Yeah, so I think it's less math specific, but more just like science and academia. I think you can really be a different person. And yeah, I also like what you value. Like like, I've just got friends who are also academics, and it's kind of their life, and so it also puts immense pressure on them when they work, because either they make it or they're broken by it. I think being a Christian really changes that, where we can enjoy it, something God's given us, and we can even use it in various capacities to serve Him. But it's not the end all be all of our existence, and I think that really makes a difference. We're completely off tangent. But
No, yeah. It sounds like you research kind of freely in a way that you're not bound by the kind of the expectations of academia. For anyone else, does that idea of freedom and really getting into the pursuit of knowledge and the pursuit of truth and looking at the beauty of like the structures behind things, how does that, do you guys feel that sense of freedom?
So I think in the physical sciences, we don't actually have as much freedom as is available in other disciplines. If you're maybe a philosopher or maybe a pure mathematician, you can construct your own axioms and then deduce things from those. Whereas in the natural sciences, you are ultimately not free because you are bound by the world around you, and your experiments, your theories, your hypotheses have to be tested against that world. And so we are free, subject to the truth of the reality that's around us. And that's a pleasant straitjacket, because otherwise I wouldn't know what to do with more freedom than that. But it's ultimately not free because you are constrained by what we perceive as reality.
So I think if I understood what you meant by freedom, how you understood what I meant is I think it just means like free to work within kind of those constraints, as you say, like not feeling as burdened. I guess it's human, you can't escape it completely, but to be free to pursue that whatever research you're doing without thinking, okay, I have to succeed in this or else. That's what I think we're free from. Not so much kind of throw everything out the window. It also came to my mind that again, I think this is true of research in general, very true for maths, and I don't know about the other areas. Is in math research, what happens is you'll be working to prove something, for example, in pure maths, and you can go for months, if not years, of not having results. Like you just don't even have data to show for it. You just have scraps of paper that you've scrunched up and chucked in the bin. And that can, I remember, so during my PhD, that was, everyone talks about how stressful this is, right? You can go several years, or like maybe like a year or two in your PhD, and you've got nothing to show for it, it seems. But I felt personally that I felt at that time that God had wanted me to do this and to be in this place, and that if He put me there, He would look after me. And so that kind of allowed me not to be really panicking about the results, and they came, right, like in the third year, that kind of thing. But yeah, so I imagine it's similar in other areas. Just you might have data and stuff like that, but still.
Yeah, sure. I mean, similar to what we've already said, that I think having a Christian faith means that you can disentangle your identity from your work. And what you said really resonated with me, that your success is no longer defined by your work. Like your success is because Jesus' success kind of paves the way for you to live as a child of God, no matter how your work goes. And that is really freeing as a concept. Yeah.
Kind of linking to Christianity and science specifically, what are some common misconceptions about the relationship between Christianity and science, and how can they be addressed, or how do you address them?
I feel like there's probably a few. I think one to start on would be, I guess, the view that science is all that there is, and that everything that we see can be explained scientifically. And I think, lots of people in science would think that, lots of people outside science would think that, scientists have to think that. But knowing that science can help us explain things like how things are, and what things are made of, how different processes happen. But I think there's so much more in the world that science can't necessarily explain. And I think, questions of beauty and justice and morality and things like that, it's really helpful to have a Christian worldview, that, there's more to life than just our material realities. And I think without having something that helps us to explain and make sense of those things, I don't know if that actually answers your question, but science is not everything.
I think something you said that I wanted to add to. So I guess, like, on the one hand, science doesn't explain everything, but on the other hand, even what science does explain doesn't completely describe it either. So I think, what do I mean by that? I think it's easy for scientists to see something and be able to describe it, right? Say, using maths, using equations, using other descriptions in terms of other known phenomena, and then just think, okay, we've explained it, therefore this is what it is. This is all it is, like a kind of reductionist way of seeing things. And I think, so because science is not this all-encompassing theory. It's a way of understanding things, and it's really helpful and useful in many instances. But it's a tool, I think, and I think that one misconception is that science and Christianity conflict. I think that's what a lot of people kind of write books on and say that they don't conflict and things like that. I think that science and Christianity don't conflict intellectually, I think, but I think that you can't, it's hard to separate science completely from its culture and from its, I guess, from its historical and philosophical roots of when it came out. Which means that we also can't just say, oh, Christianity and science are completely compatible, like, without being a bit careful about that. I think, like, an example of this is I don't know, I'll take an example, not to make any moral judgments, but this is an example of how people might approach something differently. Okay, so like, say an embryo or cells to do with humans and things like that, you can describe it scientifically as this is all it is. This is just this, because we can understand it scientifically. But I think the Christian will be like, okay, yes, we can describe these things scientifically, but this is not just what it is. There's like more behind it. And I think the culture to reduce things, because this is how we do science, we reduce things into simpler elements that we can understand, and so on and so forth. The temptation is to do that and then think we've completely understood something, when actually there's much more going on that you can't just reduce. So I think that the reductionist side of science is part of the culture, even if one argues that it's not part of the purest sense of science. I think we just have to be a bit careful sometimes. Like, yes, they don't clash, and we can harmonize them and also and use them. But also, when people say science, they think of much more than just the scientific method or just scientific discoveries and things like that. There's a lot more baggage attached to the word science.
So I've thought a lot about this question, and I think in my experience, the biggest misconception between that people have about science versus Christianity is that Christianity is about faith in things that you can't see, and science is about studying things that you can see. So if you like, one is involved with reality and the other is involved with some sort of meta reality. That's not true in either case, because actually both Christianity and science are concerned with gathering evidence and trying to piece together a puzzle based on that evidence. And ultimately, they're both truth-seeking enterprises. They both are reaching for something. And I don't think Christians claim that they have the full story. They see through a glass darkly, and any reasonable scientist won't claim that they see everything either. We are reaching, we are trying incrementally to move forward. But in my view, they're actually quite coherent in their approaches to this problem. How do I try to understand the world around me?
Yeah, definitely. I want to echo that idea that Christianity perhaps to some people might be surprisingly evidence-based. That's certainly a big encouragement for me that there are resources out there. If you want to know the truth about Christianity, you can go through a methodical process to find that out. You can look at the historicity of the Bible, you can look at these kinds of things. And if you want to look at that, I might recommend, I think it's Lee Strobel, The Case of Christ, who's a story of a journalist who went out to disprove Christianity and came back empty-handed and said, I can't disprove it. In fact, I'm quite convinced this is true. For example, there are people that can do these logical excursions and arrive at the logical, rational conclusion that Christianity is the best explanation. And another thing I wanted to say is that in my mind, science tells you how and religion tells you why. They're answering different questions. So if you think about the stars in the sky and you say, how come there are so many stars in the sky? That's because of the Big Bang, and then there was like a fluctuation in the gravitational density that pulled together mass to make stars. That's how come there are so many stars in the sky. But why are there so many? If God has created this universe, what is his purpose to putting them there? That's a completely different question. And who am I to say what God's purpose is, right? I don't want to kind of go down that path, but perhaps it might be to help us realize our smallness and his greatness. People find that helpful to look at the stars and think about that. So definitely they answer different questions and are completely coherent to come together. I once read an article that I found really encouraging on this, so I wanted to share a quote. The author is Fiona Isaacs. I was on Fixing Her Eyes, which is a Christian website, and she says, so she's a school chaplain. So she's very much from the religious background, but she's also a science teacher. So she's doing both in a school context. And she said, it is precisely because I have loved the logical order of the world that I find a need for God. And one other quote that I think is really great, she says, I believe that God can and will continue to sustain the world through the process of science, lovingly through the work of the sun. But I also know that should the Creator God want to, he can break the physical laws that he so lovingly put in place. He can do that because he is the creator and the upholder of the rules. So when I say that the miracles of the Bible are true, I do so not as someone who thinks that the laws of physics and chemistry don't hold, but rather as someone who knows that the God who is enforcing them does not always have to. And so that has kind of stuck with me, that quote, for a really long time, and I thought I'd share it as an example of how Christianity and science are very much one and the same truth-seeking experience, answering different questions.
Great, so one with me. I think there's something in how people generally approach science and generally approach things of faith, which on the one hand are compatible. On the other hand, maybe the emphases are different or something, which I think is like an aspect to faith which really emphasizes just revelation, the idea of just God revealing something to someone through the scriptures and also through the Spirit to our hearts, that can make scientists uncomfortable. Like not all scientists, right? But because on the one hand, Christianity is evidence-based. Like I think there's a really, really strong case to be made for the resurrection of Jesus and all of that. On the other hand, at some sense, kind of you make a choice, or maybe you don't make a choice. I don't know. You trust something, and sometimes I think that can make people uncomfortable. So I don't know. I feel like on the one hand, there's this kind of compatibility we've all been talking about. There's also something where I feel like science fits within faith. So they're definitely not rival magisteria, right? As Stephen Jay Gould would put it, they don't kind of have separate spheres of authority. Rather, kind of science sits within our framework of how we see the world. And that's a framework, I think, governed by faith. So yeah, I think again, like I said, like the word science can just, like, when people hear it, just means so many different things. So I think we have to sometimes be careful about disentangling what people mean by that.
Very helpful for me as an English lit student in the humanities side. It's just scared me, but then I'm becoming less scared of it after this conversation. Kind of bouncing off your point, Abe, about science as a framework through which you see the world, specifically in each of your very specific fields of research. How does your pursuit of knowledge, how does your work shape your knowledge of God, and yeah, how does your faith kind of come out through the work that you
Um, how does what's the question?
how does your pursuit of scientific knowledge shape your knowledge of God?
I think in one sense, through reading the Bible, that's given me all that I really need to know about God. I know God completely through the Bible, and through reading that, and I don't need anything else to know him better that I don't already have. But in saying that, learning about God's creation and about all the things that he's made and how things work, just shows me more about God's divine power and his creativity and his love of beauty. So it kind of just makes me marvel and makes me more in awe of God.
So I guess, speaking as a mathematician, well, one thing, maybe it's like kind of an inverse of what you were asking, but I've actually found that because I work in a field where I actually demand the highest level of certainty, like either you can prove it to me, right, and I accept that, or you can't, and I'm not sure if it's true. And whatever claims I make, I have to actually kind of prove it logically, and there's no doubt whether something is true or not. I think because of that, I know I can't approach life that way. And I'm actually really curious about how scientists who work in more experimental things, or kind of to do with more things that they observe, where there is a degree of uncertainty to things, what that means for them. Actually, funny story. I think one of the reasons I didn't like the labs in physics is because I didn't like calculating uncertainties, and I felt like every lab instructor had a different way of calculating them. But yeah, I think because of I just understand how I live life, like how I interact with my wife, or how I interact with people, or how I even interact with God, is not exactly the same way, and I don't require that kind of. I don't need mathematical proof for these things in order to trust them and to interact with them. So that for me has made a distinction. I don't look for that kind of level of proof. I think evidence is important, but I don't think I'm looking for mathematically rigorous proof for the existence of God, or for the historicity of the Bible and of Jesus. But I would be really curious to hear what other people who work in more handsy sciences think, actually.
I'll just answer the question in 1 second. I've locked it away. First, I want to say that just God is amazing. He's given us this amazing world to live in, like sunsets. How are sunsets beautiful? Rayleigh scattering and all the rest. But why are they so beautiful? Because I think God gives us these things to enjoy, and that's fantastic and glorious. And I see that in my research occasionally. Other times, this is where I'm answering your question. I think, this experiment hasn't worked. God, you know why? I don't know why. Why hasn't this experiment worked? Have I done something wrong? Is it the wrong experiment to do? And I get a bit frustrated, like, oh God, you know the answers. Why can't I do it? So that's how it works experimentally. But it also teaches me to have humility, that you need to design a question that you can answer simply. Like, you can't expect to know everything, and even then you may not be able to answer the question, but to enjoy the journey of it is the challenge, I think. Yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So Caitlin, I think if I remember your question, it was a while ago now, it was about how our pursuit of knowledge shapes our view of God or something like that. But I think, like Abe, I would probably turn that around the other way and say that it's my knowledge of God which shapes my pursuit of knowledge. Because when I'm doing my stuff, whatever that is, I am hunting for things that make sense in the simplest, most beautiful, most, yep, that's right way, because I expect my universe to operate that way because I know the creator. And I think that's actually very helpful to know that there's not sort of a random cacophony of gods who are squabbling with each other and we are just the victims of their fallout. There's one God who made everything good from the beginning, and we have a privilege of gradually uncovering that beauty and rational order, design, all those words. And so that very much shapes my approach to the scientific enterprise. The knowledge, background knowledge that it's there, that pattern is there, is enormously helpful.
Great answers. I might ask this question to you, Laura, and we'll flow on. But what role does stewardship and caring for the environment play in a Christian perspective on science and specifically in your work?
So I'm doing things in ecology and conservation kind of fields. So yeah, it's really cool being part of a field where you know, you can sort of see how that plays into God's original command at the beginning of the Bible. He wanted humans to steward and care for the earth, and I think in lots of ways, because of sin, like we see that our world is broken and lots of stuff is, you know, going wrong with it. I think, yeah, for Christians, that's a really important thing to do. Yeah, I think it's an important role of, or an important part of loving God by obeying that command, but also in loving our neighbour and caring for some of the most vulnerable people in our world. And also just things like not being greedy is pretty important in terms of how we think about the environment. And yeah, I think lots of science and technology has been used for good, but there's also been parts of it that yeah, have meant that lots of harm has been done to our world. So I think as Christians, yeah, it's just a great motivator to know that we're in caring for the environment, we're doing that because it's God's creation. And yeah.
I guess I've no practical knowledge of this, but one thing that just occurred to me is that I feel like things like the environment and what humans are doing to it, like, is that not just like really clear proof of sin and of just the scope that human sin can ruin more than just ourselves? And it's kind of like a negative way of seeing it, but also I feel like it's also clear evidence that we are made in the image of God, because we have such power to do these things, which means we have to be careful with it, right? So but yes, I think, for example, that one of the clearest attested things in the Bible is the fall and is sin. Like it's just so evidently there, and we see that in the environment and otherwise.
Yeah, so pivoting off what Laura said, science is about discovering new knowledge, uncovering more of the way that things work. But if any of you have seen this recent movie Oppenheimer, then you'll know that sometimes the pursuit of knowledge can go in directions which are very unhelpful. And the right or wrongs of World War II and the decision to bomb and so forth, not something for this panel, but it's important to emphasize that that science uncovers facts and figures and hows, as Ali was saying before, then something beyond science is required to decide whether or not a certain action should be taken. And that's where environmentalism or bombing Hiroshima or polluting waterways, whatever, that's outside the remit of science to decide whether we should do those sorts of things. Science will perhaps equip us to take action if we decide that the decision to take action is outside the realm of science. That's a moral question. And there we need to look to something other than just the collection of facts.
Yeah, I mean, much of the same. I think it's very important that we kind of take heed of God's call to worship him by caring for the creation that he has given to us. And so that kind of idea of stewardship and caring is really important to do, not just in our scientific work, but kind of in all of our lives, even in relationships with other people. And, you know, there's so much that God called us to do, but in terms of my research, it's really easy for me to explain because solar panels, you can just say 2 words, people get it. So that's really clear cut, but I think it's not often that clear cut, but it is still, regardless, quite an important thing to consider how your research affects the health of the world. And God is above that. So, you know, your work is such a small part of his plan, but it is necessary to do that and to be part of the work of caring for creation.
Give the microphone then, I'll just speak louder. Specifically to your point of solar panels, is your motivation for caring for the environment, do you find that as similar motivation? Obviously, like, it's probably obvious, but is that a similar motivation with your colleagues, or is there some kind of tension that arises in the deep motivations behind your work?
Well, some of my colleagues are here, but I won't call them out. No, I think that it's solar panels, and the reason that we need to care for the environment is something that not only Christians are convinced of, but the whole general culture and society is. So there's not often a lot of clash. Like, no one has said to me, why would you spend time on solar panels? What a terrible thing for the world. So it's kind of clear cut in that sense, but for them, for this hypothetical people that also work on solar panels but don't have a Christian faith, for these people, I don't know what their motivation would be. I think they would still have some kind of shared moral and ethic that it is important to care for the world. And as to where that comes from, it's a bit harder to pin down when you don't have a Christian framework, because the Christian framework gives us common morals that we can make these decisions from, and it's harder to pin down for people. Well, why would we bother to care for a big block of dust floating through nothing, you know? But people get it. People know that we should care for it. So I think that is a Christian desire that is masked, and they're not aware that it's a Christian desire to care for the planet. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I might just get one. I have 2 more questions, but if anyone has any questions that they want to themselves ask, I'm just giving you a warning so you can just have a think. Because there'll be time at the end. Kind of, I guess it does. It's kind of an adjacent question to the one I just asked, but what's the question? Kind of linking actually to what Peter said. Do you think that there is a need for a Christian voice in your field, in science? I could go on, but I'm just going to ask it. Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Please expand.
So, as I've said, Christian philosophy is to seek truth, and science historically has also been about seeking truth. But I have discerned in the second half of my life a worrying trend away from that, where some scientists are losing the plot and forgetting that it's about seeking the truth, and they are driven by ideology of one sort or another, rather than the pursuit of the truth, whatever that turns out to be. And so it's actually quite surprising that it's ending up being one of the tasks of the Christian voice in science to call it back home and remind people, scientists, what their job is, as distinct from what it isn't.
Yeah, of course the answer is yes, because we're called to be salt and light, right? In every field. I think also the I think also having Christians in science like does two things that are good. One is that it helps other Christians who are not themselves particularly in science, like not be afraid of it. Like they just, and if they know people who are Christians, who are scientists, it's not something that would be inherently shy away from. And on the flip side, it's also helpful for people who are not Christians to see, oh, actually, there are intelligent Christians who, I'm not saying if you're in science, you're automatically intelligent. I'm rather appealing to the fact that in the modern world, maybe less so now, but I feel like scientists are almost like priests in today's society, to some degree. They mediate between the truth and everyone else, and what they say is authoritative to some degree. And so having Christians, for better or for worse, because that's the perception some people have of scientists, that having Christians who are scientists help them see, oh, actually, like you can be intelligent and thoughtful and not turn your brain off and still believe in Jesus Christ.
That was great.
I want to go back to what you were talking about before, Abe, about how your faith influences, like the fact that you're a Christian does obviously influence your work, but it is distinct from how you operate relationally to your wife, to your friends, to your colleagues, etc. How for each of you does being a Christian and being called to be like Jesus shape how you interact with colleagues, to how you interact in the space of the university?
Or you, Laura?
I think someone touched on this before, but knowing that my identity is as a child of God is, and the freedom that brings, sort of lets me put a lot of things into perspective, and it means that I don't as much feel the pressure to sort of be chasing a career or having to be competing with colleagues and things like that. I think that sort of gives me the freedom to hopefully be able to show other people, I guess, what am I trying to say? Sorry, I feel like
Maybe I'll add to that. Yeah, I think one thing it means that we can be is just to be more generous with our time and sometimes with our ideas even, maybe. But yeah, this is both kind of for students, like I guess lots of academics teach. If you get a proper full-time permanent job, then you have to teach. But also with colleagues, like just being willing to help them out and use that precious time that you might be tempted to use exclusively for kind of publishing papers and things like that.
So in the School of Chemistry where I come from, there are a number of Christians, and I've observed them being quite distinct from the people who aren't Christians in the school. And it's interesting, generosity, which I just mentioned, is one of the virtues that I do see more from my Christian colleagues than from my non-Christian colleagues. And I think other Christian virtues as well. Patience and love. By love, I mean putting someone else ahead of yourself. I do see more of that. So I think that is not just in theory, but in practice, something that distinguishes Christians in my working place. I'm just telling you what I've seen, what I've observed.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that we are the same person at our work as we are at our church or at our home with our friends. And so who I am or who I try to be is regardless of where I am in my week and who I am seeing and interacting with. So all of the things that we hear about on a Sunday, and it's, you know, it's hard to be like a rude person at church, right? You know, you're always a nice person at church, and then to kind of continue that through your week. Yeah, it doesn't have to be anything to do with where I am, what occupation I have, but all of these virtues about generosity and truth and humility and support and care and love and genuine interest in the people around you, and how you can kind of make their lives better, is a really great way to be different, and then have people ask you questions, why are you different, and kind of have a conversation from that.
Also, something that came to mind, and I'm sure this is true of every workplace, but because I've only known this workplace, that it's human nature to complain about things. And I feel like it happens a lot in academia, and often specifically about things like about students or about administration, bureaucracy, all that stuff. The finance department, the whatever, and especially like, I guess, like when a new dean comes in or something and tries to restructure things, and everyone complains. But I think as Christians, just and I'm really bad at this. It is something I'm trying to learn, just to not always join in with the complaining. And I think it's fair to kind of have complaints to tell higher ups kind of what things you don't think should work this way. But I think that's different from just like a culture of, oh, what do we talk about in the common room between research breaks? Someone's complaining about something, about grant writing, about these students doing this, or yeah. I think that must be true in every workplace, but I felt this especially so where I am.
Yeah, that in particular is something that I found as well, and I think I've consciously tried to not join in with that as well. And I don't know if people notice it, but I hope that they do,
Yeah.
and I hope that they wonder why. Yeah.
Great answers. Does anyone, this is rote, no one has to have a question, but if there are any questions, please raise your hand. Lucy.
Okay, great, all right. I guess I'm wondering if anyone has an opinion on the idea of excellence and whether that merits, whether you see it attached to a right to speak about the why of things.
What it definitely does do is it gives you a platform. I don't know if that's the same as the right. I think in practical terms, yes, because that's how things work. I don't know about some abstract right that hangs in the ether. I'm not sure. But it definitely gives you kind of credibility, right? So in terms of practice, I think yes. Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up? How do you deal with the idea of excellence as scientists?
Let me just say that loudly. Oh, you can say it loudly.
Oh, into this.
Yeah. So
I've not been speaking loudly into this. I'm sorry. So the question is, how do we deal with excellence or think about excellence as Christians and as academics? Well, actually, I was very grateful that Caitlin said that we were all brilliant, because I don't think I've heard that much about me or my work. But I think for Christians generally, I think the goal should be faithfulness. And I think often that means that excellence follows, but not always. So yeah, I think if kind of, I think that as people working in academia, like we're very privileged. Like not many people can spend most of their time doing stuff that at least they purportedly like, right? So yeah, so I think kind of using that time well, and working hard. But yeah, I'm not sure about, maybe someone else has a better thought about what do you mean by excellence? Kind of like publishing in Nature, or like
I suppose maybe a cluster of related ideas like
Prize.
yeah, so acclaim or even integrity.
I think if there's something that disqualifies someone from having a voice, it's integrity. So maybe that's, I think when you were asking, does excellence earn you the right to speak? I definitely think, okay, in some areas there are rights. I think having integrity does or rather not having integrity does in some ways take away your right to speak, I think, at least with any moral authority. I'm not sure about excellence. Maybe someone who's actually done excellent work could comment.